We are interviewing, sir. What is your name?
Amos Miers,
Amos, when is your birthday?
2/10/1977,
And what is your current address?
7516 13th Avenue North, St. Petersburg, Florida 33710.
Okay, good. Okay, so, what branch of the service did you serve in?
United States Marine Corps.
Okay. What years?
I believe it was 96 to 2000.
Right, okay. And what was your rank when you separated?
My rank when I separated, it was actually bumped down to private.
Okay. And where did you serve?
I served reserves first in the reserve unit in Jacksonville, Florida, and then in Tampa, Florida. Or I might have those reversed. Actually, I did reserve first in Tampa, then Jacksonville.
Okay, all right. So were you drafted or enlisted?
Enlisted.
Okay. And where were you living at the time?
I attended a semester of college in Gainesville, University of Florida, and then after a semester of college, I started my Marine Corps training, and that's so it was Gainesville, Florida, and I spent a couple years actually. Once I started doing training, I attached to some active duty trips in the military before going back to college and joining the reserves.
Okay. So you were in college at the time?
Yes, I signed up while in high school,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd already had planned on going to college. And the recruiter that had contacted me brought up the idea of reserves. So that's where the reserve idea came into being.
Gotcha. Okay. Why did you pick the Marines?
That's a good question. At the time in high school, I was a rebel. I was when the Marine came, when I was called to the office in high school and saw a full dress blues Marine standing there, I thought I was in trouble. I thought I was called in for something, and I said, okay, I've really messed up now. They sent in the Marines. So, so really, since they contacted me, is probably the reason that it was the Marine Corps. But my perceptions at the time was that there was something alluring about the Marine, so it was something drew me to that. So, but it probably also had to do with that was who connected with me first.
Right, I got you. Mm-hmm. Okay, so where'd you say you were living?
At that time, I was Kissimmee, Florida. That was where I was going to high school.
All right, okay.
Yes.
And so when you, I guess you went down and enlisted locally, correct?
I signed the papers in Kissimmee, Florida, and then I went to college. But then when I was in Tampa going through MEPS before going into boot camp. So that's the process I remember.
MEPS?
Whatever the processing was prior to going into boot camp,
Mm-hmm.
that was like a day-long process.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you went to boot camp?
Yes, in
Where?
Paris Island.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Where's that? What state is that in again?
Paris Island, that's South Carolina.
Carolinas, right?
Yeah.
And how long was the boot camp?
Boot camp in that time was, I believe it was 6 or 8 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you remember your instructors?
Sergeant Rutan, I believe, was my Staff Sergeant Rutan. Yeah, my drill instructor.
Okay.
I remember every one of their faces.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And tell me about it. What was boot camp like?
When I got on the bus, or when we pulled into Paris Island, and a drill instructor got onto the bus, and I can't remember what he said, and everyone said, "Sir, yes, sir." And I heard everyone in unison, and I didn't know I was supposed to say such a thing. I would thought, okay, I'm already not on the same page. I didn't know the difference between an officer and an enlisted. I didn't know that you salute one and not the other. I didn't know that you listened to your chain of command and not another chain of command, and they even got me for that because they play with you the first few days. So I did not have any idea what I was getting into.
Right.
And my first bunkmate, we found out a few days later, was actually a heroin addict that had gone cold turkey going into Parris Island. So when I thought everyone didn't know, well, no one knew really what was going on the first few days, and you're getting used to the transition. It was even harder because my bunkmate was having a whole nother struggle. So yeah, it was a very interesting and confusing time.
Gotcha. So, do you feel like it was more demanding mentally or physically?
Mentally.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell me about the physical part.
So after a few days of the processing, we go into our squad bays with all our gear on for the first time ever. That alone with the I remember the chin strap and just all the gear, and it wasn't fitting right. We didn't know how to put it on. Just that march to our squad bays, that march alone, I was like, I'm ready to give up. This is insane. So, and we get into our squad bay, and the instructors had brought us through those few days. Leave, we're sitting there, we hear the door close, and our drill instructors just, it's almost like a pack of wild dogs just go, and they just start organizing us, putting in our lining us up into the bunks, and it was an insane moment. It was a very interesting experience, and that was all part of their conditioning and training program. And from that moment on, we were lockstep in tune with our drill instructors. They can be talking at in another room with just a whisper, and we would be tuned in and say, "Sir, yes, sir," and listen to commands. That's how tuned they had us. It was very interesting. The physical part, when we would get in trouble or whatever and have to do the jumping jacks and the push-ups and all the things that they would make us do as punishment for some perceived thing. It was more about the mental ability, I think, to keep going. Just not knowing when it was going to stop. But I mean, it was physically demanding, of course, but it was because you didn't have control over your own. You couldn't use a phone. You couldn't do anything. You could not speak without asking permission. So not knowing when things were going to start and stop made the physical part more of a mental challenge, because you didn't know how long are we going to run for, how long are we going to keep doing push-ups for, how long are we going to do whatever we're doing for. Most of it was just trying to stay focused and be prepared mentally. I remember most of it it felt physical, but it was more just being focused on getting through each next step.
Okay. So it was rigorous.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So, how long did you say basic training was? 8?
At that time, I believe it was 6. It was 6 to 8 weeks. I think it was 6 weeks.
Okay. But you got through it.
Yes.
So at the end of the 6 weeks, what did you do?
We had a week between boot camp and Marine combat training. He's in the Marine Corps. Every Marine's a rifleman. So the cooks, everybody. We go to 1 month of Marine combat training. So after boot camp, we had 1 month 1 week vacation, I guess, or and
Leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What'd you do? Did you come home or?
Yes, I went home. Yeah, and it was a very interesting experience, because just those 6 weeks, which seemed like an eternity, and then going back home and seeing my friends that I'd partied with, and then to go party, it was just different. Everything was different.
Right.
I was a different. Everything, it just affect everything.
You changed.
It was absolutely, yeah.
Outlook, everything, huh?
Yeah.
Perception, consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
I understand. I
Yeah.
got you. Okay. Yeah, that'll happen. Okay, so you survived the leave and went back.
Mhm.
So where did you go back to the Camp Lejeune again?
Yeah,
Paris Island.
From there we did go to Camp Lejeune to do the 4-week Marine combat training.
And that's in the Carolinas too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
4-week combat. What did that consist of?
Hand-to-hand combat. I'm trying to think. I remember hand-to-hand combat. Actually, those 4 weeks are kind of fuzzy. I do remember the physical, hand-to-hand stuff. We also, because we were able to leave on the weekends versus boot camp,
Right.
we spent a lot of time partying on those weekends, which made us a mess during the week while we're trying to train. So, we're all like 18, 19 years old, and they set us loose, and we're getting tattoos. I got a tattoo. Like, I think every Marine at that time were getting tattoos, showing the pictures of us getting tattoos and
Right.
drinking, even though we're all underage. And
Right.
so I think I remember more of that than the actual training. But I know we trained really hard.
Okay, so that 4 weeks was a blur.
Yeah. Yes, it was.
And so what happened after that?
Then I went to California for the job that I was going to be in.
Where'd you go? North. Well.
It was at Camp Del Mar, and that's where I spent 6 months learning how to be an amphibious assault crewman on Amtrak's, the vehicles that go from ship to shore.
Right. Right. Okay. And you learned how to do what?
Operate the amphibious assault vehicle.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. How'd you like that?
I enjoyed it. I liked the job that luckily that's the job that was given to me, or I helped, my recruiter helped pick that job. When he asked me what job I wanted to do in the military when I was signing up, I didn't even know there was a choice. That's how naive I was going in. So I just said, well, if I'm going in, I want to fight. And he could have easily put me in infantry, but instead he said amphibious assault. And in my mind, I'm thinking like SEAL team, like you're in a boat, river. I had no idea what that even meant, but amphibious assault, I'm like, that sounds cool. So when I discovered what it actually was, it was still very interesting. Operating that vehicle on land and in water. It's got a turret as well. It's 50 caliber machine gun, 40
Right.
millimeter grenade launcher. Carries how many? 18 fully ready combat troops. From keep them safe from the ship to the shore, and then continue to support them on land. Learning how to fix and maintain a vehicle and operate it. It was really interesting. A really detailed course.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you got that training. How long did that take?
It was about 6 months.
6 months.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so you got trained on the vehicle. The blur has lifted. So where's your first duty station?
So from there,
Did you go back on leave again, or did you? Go straight to your...
Well, I was now in the reserves at that point. So I could have went back to Gainesville. Instead, I got assigned to Tampa because I had family in Tampa area, and I decided to take some more time off of college. And since the Marine Corps is smaller, when there's the exercise the branch is committed to every year, there's opportunities for reserves to attach to active duty assignments. So I did a trip to an exercise in South Korea and also Australia before going back to college. So during that time, I was assigned to Tampa.
Okay. So were you ever on active duty?
I was temporarily on active duty for those exercises.
Yeah, I understand. But you signed up for the reserve.
Correct.
Okay, we just need to change that. It's no big deal. That's fine. Okay. So you were stationed where in
Tampa.
In Tampa for how long?
A year
What
or
year?
two. That was would have been 97, 98. and I did that. I think it was 97 actually, because when I went back to Gainesville, then I was assigned to Jacksonville. So I think by then that was the end of 97 or 98. No, that was 98. So Tampa was 97.
Okay, that's when you started. When was it over? How long were you there?
I was there for another, I think about 6 months or so.
Okay, but you just went once a month.
Once a month, yes, 1 weekend a month.
And okay, so what did your duties consist of on that weekend?
Just keeping our training up with the vehicles, actually maintaining the vehicles that were out there, busting a lot of the rust off of it, and taking whatever refresher courses that were ongoing to keep us ready if we're ever called in. So it was continued training.
Right. Okay. On your 2 weeks a year, where'd you go?
1 year we went to Camp Lejeune and spent time out there. I for the first year or two, I didn't have to do the 2 weeks because I assigned to because I attached to active duty exercises that satisfied my two requirement. So when I went to South Korea, that instead of doing the 2 weeks that everyone else did at that unit, I went to South Korea instead.
Uh-huh.
And in the next year, I think the Australia trip satisfied that requirement.
What did you do for the 2 weeks in South Korea?
So South Korea, we took part in an exercise that happens once a year with the South Korean military, where there's a big show of force. There's ships, American ships as well as South Korean ships up and down the coast. We had we basically simulated our exercises together, and we all launched our amphibious assault vehicles, helicopters, and we hit the beach. Once we hit the beach, the troops got out and then they went on to their mission. At that point, we actually sat on the beach for a week until they got back, and then we brought them back onto the ship.
So you're sitting there for a week. What are you doing?
We're trading food for alcohol that kids would bring into us, and our weapons. We had no ammo in our weapons. It was an exercise, so there was no live ammo. However, we still had our weapons. You're never supposed to leave your weapon out of your hand, but these kids would come up, and I remember a Marine letting one of the kids handle his weapon, and he was like 8 or 9. The kid knew how to break down and put back together the M16. It was amazing. So they're very, there's and their Marines are even sharper in their dress uniform, their fatigues than we were, and we had press fatigues, and they had even more creases. Their Marines looked even sharper, so it was really impressive. But so we sat out and basically drank and waited and did stupid things until we were ready to come back to the ship.
Okay. All right. So a year later, you go to Australia.
Yes.
Tell me about that one.
So that one was a whole different experience in that the first trip we were on a Navy ship, and we launched off of that. So in Australia, we were on a civilian ship, Merchant Marines.
Okay.
And that's where I learned why Marines can get anywhere in the world within 24 hours with a fighting force. There's these civilian ships that look just like a freighter. No difference. They're all floating equidistant around the globe, and half the hull is filled with vehicles. The other half the hull is filled with munitions and food and supplies. And I was there as a driver for the vehicle, and they actually didn't need our vehicles for the mission or the exercise. However, our vehicles were in the way. Right. So we drove our vehicles off the ship to make way for the other vehicles, and then actually just waited for the rest of the exercise, and then drove our vehicles back on the ship. So, okay. Yeah.
Did you have any interaction? Well, in Korea, you interacted with the kids. Mm-hmm. Did you have any interaction with any adults in South Korea? Yeah,
we went into the town whenever there was leave opportunity, and and it was a port town, which most often that's where we would be. So it was mostly a bar kind of scene, an area. But yeah, we did interact with a lot of the locals at that time. So that was an interesting experience too. However, they were used to different, either military or other shipping, merchant marines, and yeah, and other, So it was a port town. Right. So going outside of that area, it was different because they didn't. Whenever we interacted outside of that area, you could tell we were treated differently. People didn't want to see us going out into other areas, especially being young military. A lot of there's a lot of times there's they run into problems with young military going out and partying and acting out. So
right.
So even though that's not what I was doing, we wouldn't get the best reception. But in the port area, it was different because they were catering to us and wanted us to, be at their restaurants and bars and things.
Right. In Australia,
we were in a smaller town, and it was very welcoming. It was very interesting, and I actually met somebody that was in the Australian military, and he invited us to his home. We had dinner. We talked about what was going on in his country. They had just outlawed guns, for instance, and but he had let us know that they all have them still. They're not going to give them up, and for good reason. So. But it was more, and also because we spoke a similar language, it was easier to communicate, and they were very interested in hearing about our culture and what we were doing, and so there was more educational in terms of understanding what another country is like and what they're doing.
Okay. Were there ever any casualties in your unit?
Not while I was there. We did have a very serious injury during our training in Camp Pendleton. So in the vehicle, I was a driver. The crew chief sits in the turret and gives directions to the driver, and then we have the third person, call him the dungeon master. I'm not sure actually what their official title is, but they sit in the back by the back hatch, and we're all plugged in with communication helmets. So the person in the back, near the back hatch, has control over either dropping the ramp, opening the hatch, or if we're towing another vehicle, pulling the line if the other vehicle's sinking. So the person in the back basically controls that space, especially if we have full troops there, making sure that everyone's doing what they need to do to keep the vehicle safe. So there's 3 people in the vehicle. So I'm driving. We have a crew chief. When we're out training, every time we're using vehicles, they're usually not the vehicles that they use for combat are typically kept safe and like on the merchant marine ships, for instance, they were all in oxygen depleted hulls. Like they would remove the oxygen from the hull so nothing would rust. Everything was in pristine shape. When we went out and trained in Camp Pendleton, the vehicles were not in great shape. The gear, the communication helmets were. Plus, we going there as reserve. They were giving us bad, the kind of the worst equipment that they had available. Versus they wanted to keep the better stuff for the people that were on the base.
Right.
So the point I'm getting to is one of our helmets didn't work. The communication didn't work. You can hear, but you couldn't communicate. You couldn't speak. So. We had a young Marine in the back, and he wanted to be able to communicate, and our crew chief gave him his helmet instead of using one that he can communicate with. So I had no way of hearing commands from our crew chief, and I had a problem with that, and it led to an injury that almost killed our crew chief. So as we're driving through the mountains in Camp Pendleton, we're driving down a riverbed, but we're going to go up the mountain, and because we're going through a tree line, we're supposed to turn our turrets backwards so because otherwise the barrels of the weapons would catch in trees and it would flip the turrets around.
Right.
Well, our crew chief didn't turn his turret backwards, and I didn't know this, and because I can't see him, I can only hear him. Was as we go through the trees, I hear what I thought was we were all like kind of having fun off-roading it up this mountain, as all the vehicles in the line were doing, and what I thought were cheers and like woohoo was actually our crew chief yelling in agony. Apparently, what had happened, his leg in the turret in the basket. When you're sitting in the basket, you're sitting in an open basket. So as you turn the turret around, the walls of around your turret is staying stationary, and you're turning within it. He had got his leg twisted, or had his leg hanging outside the basket, and when that turret flipped around, it snapped his leg. And so we continued on for 10-15 minutes on this crazy off-road trail, and he's bouncing around in agony, and I had no idea. So when we stopped, we discovered this, and we had to literally take the turret apart to get him out, and that's where we discovered not every toolbox had a complete tool set. So I was running up and down all the vehicles, frantic, trying to get a complete tool set to get to, and we had a mechanic that was, so we knew basic maintenance on our vehicles, but we had mechanics specifically for our vehicles that knew it even more detail. So we had mechanics taking the turret apart, and we finally got him out, and he was medevaced out. We had a great corpsman, a Navy corpsman, that saved his life. And also the fact that we were running around trying to get this tool set together to give to the mechanics. It was a moment where we all operated, as one, like training, so that was the most serious injury that I had experienced in my time there.
Okay, well, that was some experience. Okay, you never actually saw any combat?
No.
Well, fine, that's fine. So you were never a prisoner of war. How was the food?
I enjoyed the food. We ate good. Boot camp was great. All the bases we went to had great food. I remember the food being great. When we on our way to, was it Australia or South Korea? We were in Guam. We were stationed at Air Base, and the food was good there. Navy ships. Because most of the time that's all you're doing is while you're waiting, you're eating. But I remember eating a lot. I had no complaints with the food.
Okay. Did you? How did you stay in touch with your family while you were in the service? Well, when you were gone on those 2 weeks, I guess the weekend it wasn't such a big deal. Right.
Training and also on the trips overseas, I wrote letters, and when I was doing training, I would get letters back, and then phone calls on weekends once it was past boot camp. But then when we were overseas, it was one-way communication with letters, and that was before. Cell phones were kind of kicking off, but we weren't as accessible. Calling was a little bit more difficult, like compared to today, where I imagine most everyone has a cell phone when they're out doing. Right. That's a global phone, but yeah, so I was actually still in that transition where we were writing letters.
Gotcha. Yeah. You feel like you have all the supplies that you need while you're in the service? Are you still in the reserve?
No. We had, you could tell that we were a branch with the least amount of money. Our gear wasn't top notch. It was hand-me-downs. It wasn't the greatest shape. Now I do believe once they go to combat, they do have better gear. But what I experienced in training was that the gear wasn't. It was in poor condition.
Okay. All right. So was those the only places have you covered? Have you shared with me every place that you ever traveled while you were in the service? Australia, Guam.
Yeah, I was in Okinawa on the way to. I think that was where. Okinawa was where we got on the ship to go to South Korea. So Guam was on our way to Australia. So I was on a base in Okinawa. I was on a base in Guam. We were Australia, South Korea, camp, and then I think that's the only places outside the country. And then here was Paris Island, Camp Lejeune, Camp Pendleton, Camp Delmar, and in Jacksonville we did go to Camp Landing. We trained out in Camp Landing.
What did you do there? Oh, you trained.
Yeah, and that we did 2 weeks. One year was 2 weeks out in Camp Landing.
Okay, really cool. Have you used your GI Bill for school? Or
I was so the Marine or the reserves is a smaller monthly bill, monthly check than if you do active duty.
Right.
So I was using that while I was in the reserves, and then I actually left the reserves before my contract was over, and I didn't believe I qualified for the GI Bill anymore, and so I wasn't getting it, and then they said I did qualify, so I started taking it, and then I found out that I was right and I didn't qualify anymore, and I had to pay that back. So I don't have benefits, I don't have a GI Bill.
Oh, really?
Right.
Okay. Oh. Sorry to hear that. Did you make any close friends while you were in the service?
Yeah, I
Still
don't
stay in touch?
No, I don't stay in touch. But while we were there, everyone's real tight. You know, I did have friends. You know, in every place I went to. You know, you got tight quick. But since I left, I haven't been in contact with anyone.
Right.
So I did read about one of our sergeants. That had gotten called into Iraq, actually. The unit I was at did get called up, and my platoon actually got hit with an IED. So that would have been my platoon had I been in. So.
Right, I hear you. Okay, just last couple of questions. Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or about the military in general?
Yes.
How so?
So, going into the military, it was odd that my dad was shocked. Everyone was shocked that I joined. But you know, looking back, it was clear, you know, that it wasn't a big leap for almost anyone growing up to join, because everything that we're conditioned to, everything that we watch on TV, and more it's war related, it's violent. There's guns in almost every show, every media outlet. So you know, and we have the sense of patriotism, you know, that as we're going through school. So it wasn't a big leap for me, even as a rebel metalhead high school student, to still consider the military as, you know, something that, you know, I wanted to explore. Going into it, I was very proud of who I served with, and I was also going to school in college, and as I'm learning more, reading more, growing in college, and learning just about the world in general, being out of the home, out of the house, you know, exploring, you know, things, learning new things, unfiltered, you know, accessing the internet, you know, it was at the time was kind of a new thing, to where you can now start searching for information, and the information is starting to become more available on websites. I started learning more how our government operated. So seeing how we were operating in the military, and seeing how our government was using our military, it started to become clearer that there was a disconnect for me. I started seeing that we weren't out necessarily defending and serving. We were being used in different ways, and I started having a problem with how our military was being used. And even though I wasn't in combat, there's active duty stationed all over the world, and you're starting to learn where all the bases are and how many bases we have and how many countries that we've never left. And I just happened to be in that small window where they're in between the two Iraq wars. Had I completed my contract, it would have been 6 years reserves, 2 years inactive. During that last part, I would have been called up with my unit and I would have been in Iraq. And I might have been in that vehicle that got hit with the IED that the sergeant that I very fond of. I remember his name, Sergeant Sanchez, and I just happened one day to read the newspaper. I wasn't commonly reading newspapers because it wasn't the kind of news I was looking for, and I don't know why. I just picked up a newspaper and reading the story about Sergeant Sanchez. He was a Lakeland police officer, and he had saved a couple Marines that had gotten, and he was always protecting us when we went out in the town. He was older, big guy, and we were young and partying and acting silly, and he would always protect us. He'd make sure we get home, and he did that exact same thing in combat. So I read about him saving some Marines that had got hit and walked. I don't know how far he walked across the desert, bring them back to safety, and I learned a lot. As I was learning how our military is being used, I was just seeing that it was only a matter of time before I was going to get pulled into a conflict that I wasn't going to agree with.
Right.
So I did some homework and researched it and decided to leave the military before my contract was finished.
Gotcha.
So I basically went AWOL, or at the time it's called unauthorized absence. I stopped showing up for my weekend duty.
Okay. All right. You answered the question. Okay. Last question. How did your service and experiences affect your life?
Being trained as a Marine gave me it is greatly I think it's impacted me in a very positive way in terms of how I handle situations, combining that with what I learned in college, architecture school, with critical thinking skills. My training in the military and in college allows me to be successful at the things I'm doing today. I was trained as a warrior, and I'm fighting for peace, as ironic as that sounds. Fighting for peace. It is giving me a sense of urgency, determination, and a level of discipline that I don't know if I would have if I didn't have that Marine training. So I'm very involved with a lot of things that I hit really hard. I think the Marine training is a big part of that.
What did you do when you got out of the service?
So I was in architecture school while I was in the reserves, and I met my wife at University of Florida.
Right.
And the plan was she would get her master's degree, and then I would get my master's degree. We'd complete our undergrad together. So to become a registered architect, you either do a four-year undergrad, 2-year master's, or a 5-year program. So we did the 4-2. She did her part and completed her training, and then I didn't want to borrow another $100,000 student loan, the amount that we would need. So I thought we'd partner, and she would be the registered architect, and I would work. Instead, it didn't work out quite that way. But she is partner of a firm, successful firm today. I worked at other firms for a while, then went on my own, and have had a company for about 12 years now, doing architectural related work, design work, and renderings and website graphic design, and I try to work on projects that are with clients that are doing good things in the community, whether it's affordable housing or anything that's doing something positive, socially responsible businesses, as best as I can. So while I was doing that, connecting back to the political stuff I was learning, I started getting involved in activism, and most of my life today is revolving around work that is actually non-paid work. I have a hard time actually getting back to my paid projects. I'm the vice chair of the Pinellas County Democratic Party. I'm the president of the Progressive Caucus, Democratic Progressive Caucus of Pinellas County. We just formed that 3 months ago. A member of the Veterans Caucus. I got voted in as a board member of the State Progressive Caucus. Those things are relatively new. Prior to that, I didn't want to get involved in politics. I was involved in activism, and through the Bernie movement, I got deeper into the Democratic Party, and it's so I'm working round the clock basically. I think I'm getting an average of 4 hours of sleep, 4 hours a night sleep, and just taking on a lot, because there's a lot that we're working on right now. So I'm working to help make the Democratic Party better. I was involved in the Occupy movement for a period of time when that was going on. I faced some pretty serious times during the Occupy movement. Faced police riots, FBI surveillance when I was protesting the RNC in Tampa in 2012. They came to my door. Probably the military helped me with that, dealing with that situation. It didn't scare me like it might other people. Maybe I should have been. I probably should have been scared. Actually, I should have. I know I should have been scared. There's a lot of things I did that I should have been more scared than I was. Looking in hindsight, it was pretty serious stuff that we were dealing with. But that led me into getting involved, realizing you have to be inside the political engine, not just outside. It has to be inside and outside. So started working on positive solutions to make our country better, and to me it was the clearest path forward. I took my oath very seriously in the Marine Corps, even though I walked out, went unauthorized absence, stopped showing up, and got kicked out, reduced rank to private, lost my benefits. I still maintain that oath to defend our Constitution from enemies, foreign and domestic. I just didn't feel that the enemies were foreign; the enemies were within, and so that's where I'm putting my energy. I still maintain my oath, even though I'm not in the military, and that's exactly what I'm doing. The safest, most efficient way I see positive change to happen is through the Democratic Party, fixing it, making it better, and then making our government better, removing the corporate grip off our government. That's exactly what the Occupy movement was about, and that's what I'm doing in the party. So to me, it's a continuation of the oath I took before ever walking into boot camp. It's the same oath. It's exactly what I'm doing today.
Okay. How do you feel about the present climate overall of what's going on in the country?
I didn't get involved to fight fascism. That's what we're now added to our list of things to do. I think we're in some very troubling times, and I've seen the process, how we got to this point, happening over a long period of time, and it's just gone completely nuts. But there's actually a plan how it got to be this way, and I think that we can have just as an effective plan to counter it. So we're in the process of doing that. I think that we're in a very serious crossroads, that if we don't have the correct solution to it, we're gonna be in some serious trouble. So I'm very concerned about the current climate that we're in. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
I know we'll be successful.
Have a good night.
Thank you.